This will be fun with a very bad camera from hmm. Hmm. Oh well, we'll do that later. Because the whole point is not about showing me on the screen, but to basically read. Either way, I know I'm trying to myself a little bit there, but hello, ladies and gentlemen, Forrest over here, and welcome back to another reading live stream. As you can tell from the title, I will be reading uh, Stephen King's Night Shift. I do want to say I apologize for the very bad camera quality right here because it's not too bad this way on this side, but on this side it's really, really, really crappy. But eh, it is what it is. But we're not here to. But we're not here to do a reaction. We're here to read. That's pretty much the whole gist of this. So at least you guys will be able to at least hear me, even if my camera quality right now at this point, because sometimes my camera is really good, other times my camera is shit. But whatever. Either way, the whole point is for this to be a reading stream, not a reaction stream. Saving that for tomorrow on Halloween night as well. But either way, let's go ahead and get started with Stephen King's Night Shift Part 4. For this part, I will be trying to read two stories of this book. The first one is I Am the Doorway, and the second one being The Mangler. I just ate, and so that way we're all good. I did just eat, and I just got done eating about 5 minutes ago. And in case something were to happen, I do have a glass of tea right here. So without further ado, let's begin. I am the doorway. Richard and I sat on my porch, looking out over the dunes to the Gulf. The smoke from his cigar drifted mellowly in the air, keeping the mosquitoes at a safe distance. The water was a cool agua, the sky a deeper, truer blue. It was a pleasant combination. You are the doorway, Richard repeated through thoughtfully. You are sure you killed the boy. You didn't just dream it. I didn't dream it. And I didn't kill him either. I told you that. They did. I am the doorway. Richard sighed. You buried him? Yes. You remember where? Yes. I reached into my breast pocket and got a cigarette. My hands were awkward with their covering of bandages. They itched abominably. If you want to see it, you'll have to get the dune buggy. You can't rule this. I indicated my wheelchair. Through the sand. Richard's dune buggy was a 1959 Volkswagen with pillow-sized tires. He collected driftwood in it. Ever since he retired from the real estate business in Maryland, he had been living on Key Caroline and building driftwood. I'm gonna read that out. I'm gonna say that after this this paragraph, because I'm just about done. He had been living on Key Caroline and building driftwood sculptures, which he sold to the winter tourists at shameless prices. Alright, so first off, hello Daniel, how are you doing tonight? And to Daniel Barry, happy Tuesday to you as well. I apologize, like I said before when I first started this, wait, Oh! Daniel Harris. That name sounds familiar. Oh, that name sounds so familiar to me. But I don't like making assumptions because I know there are a number of people with the name of Daniel Harris as well, but I'm pretty sure I remember a Daniel Harris. Because the Daniel Harris that's popping up in my head, literally, was a created character, a created wrestler from the Call community, who I think. Yeah, okay, yeah. Because I think you. Because the one thing I remember from you was. The one thing I remember the most was I think he was either in a tag team or had a rivalry with another created wrestler from back in the day, from a few years back. And quite truthfully, I'm not really into Call that much anymore. Like, I'll pop on from time to time to see how everybody's doing, but I'm not really active as I used to be in it anymore. Mainly because personal life can be a fucking bitch. I don't do sometimes I do on X. But yeah, I'm the sort of the same way. I do it like once in a blue moon. I may pop in and say something to other people, but otherwise I'm not really saying much on there anymore. So yeah, I get that. Getting back to the story, but also Daniel, how you doing tonight though? How you been? It's been a while. Hope you're doing well though. Same, but just busy IRL. Yeah, same. Getting back to the story, he puffed his cigar and looked out at the gulf. Not yet. Will you tell me once more? Seeing that, I wanted to say this quote, say that paragraph. Good to hear you're doing great. Good to hear. I sighed and tried to light my cigarette. He took the matches away from me and did it himself. I puffed twice, dragging deep. The itch of my fingers was maddening. All right, I said. Last night at 7 I was out here, looking at the Gulf and smoking, just like now, and go further back, he invited. Further? Tell me about the flight. I shook my head. Richard, we've been through it and through it. There's nothing. The seamed and fissured face was as enigmatic as one of his own driftwood sculptures. You may remember, he said. Now you may remember. Do you think so? Possibly. And when you're through, we can look for the grave. The grave, I said. It had a hollow, horrible ring, darker than anything, darker even than all that terrible ocean Corey and I had that sailed through 5 years ago. Dark, dark, dark. Beneath the bandages, my new eyes stared blindly into the darkness, bandages forced on them. They itched. Background noise. Hmm. There's a reason why I'm looking at my door. You may or may not see, but it depends on what they do. Okay, I don't think they're coming in here like I thought they were. Alright. And when I say they, I mean my family member. Anyway, getting back to the story. Corey and I were boosted into orbit by the Saturn 16, the one all the commentators called the Empire State Building booster. It was a big beast, alright. It made the old Saturn 1B look like a redstone, and it took off from a bunker 200 feet deep. It had to keep from taking half of Cape Kennedy with it. We swung around the Earth, verifying all our systems, and then did our inject. Headed out for Venus, we left a Senate fighting over an appropriations bill for further deep space exploration, and a bunch of NASA people praying that we would find something, anything. It don't matter what, Don Levenger, Project Zeus's private whiz kid, was very fond of saying when he'd had a few. You got all the gadgets plus 5 souped-up TV cameras and a nifty little telescope with a zillion lenses and filters. Find some gold or platinum. Better yet, find some nice, dumb little blue men for us to study and exploit and feel superior to. Anything. Even the ghost of Howdy Doody would be a start. Corey and I were anxious enough to oblige, if we could. Nothing had worked for the deep space program. From Borman, Anders, and Lavelle, who orbited the moon in '68 and found an empty, forbidding world that looked like dirty beach sand, to Markham and Jax, who touched down on Mars 11 years later to find an arid wasteland of frozen sand and a few struggling lichens. The deep, the deep space program had been an expensive bust, and there had been casualties. Pedersen and Lederer, internally circling the sun when all at once nothing worked on the second-to-last Apollo flight. John Davis, whose little orbiting observatory was holed by a meteoroid in a once in a thousand fluke. No, the space program was hardly swinging along. The way things looked, the Venus orbit might be our last chance to say, "We told you so." It was 16 days out. We ate a lot of concentrates, played a lot of gin, and swapped a cold back and forth. And from the tech side, it was a milk run. We lost an air moisture converter on the third day out. Went to back up, and that was all. Except for nits and gnats, until re-entry. We watched Venus grow from a star to a quarter to a milky crystal ball, swapped jokes with Huntsville Control, listened to tapes of Wagner and the Beatles, tended to automated experiments which had to do with everything from measurements of the solar wind to deep space navigation. We did two mid-course corrections, both of them infinitesimal. And 9 days into the flight, Corey went outside and banged on the retractable DESA until it decided to operate. There was nothing else out of the ordinary until DESA, Richard said. What's that? An experiment that didn't pan out. NASA S for Deep Space Antenna. We were broadcasting pi and high frequency pulses for anyone who cared to listen. I rubbed my fingers against my pants, but it was no good. If anything, it made it worse. Same idea as the radio telescope in West Virginia. You know, the one that listens to the stars. Only instead of listening, we were transmitting, primarily to the deeper space planets. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus. If there's any intelligent life out there, it was taking a nap. Only Corey went out? Yes. And if he brought in any interstellar planes, the telemetry didn't show it. Still, it doesn't matter, I said crossly. Only the here and now matters. They killed the boy last night, Richard. It wasn't a nice thing to watch or feel. His head, it exploded. And if someone had scooped out his brains and put a hand grenade in his skull, as if someone had scooped out his brains and put a hand grenade in his skull. Finish the story, he said. I laughed hollowly. What's to tell? We went into eccentric orbit around the planet. It was radical and deteriorating. 320 by 76 miles. That was on the first swing. The second swing had our apogee was even higher, the perigee lower. We had a max of 4 orbits. We made all 4. We got a good look at the planet. Also over 600 stills and God knows how many feet of film. The cloud cover is equal parts methane, ammonia, dust, and flying shit. The whole planet looks like the Grand Canyon in a wind tunnel. Corey estimated wind speed at about 600 miles per hour per hour near the surface. Our probe beeped all the way down and then went out with a squawk. We saw no vegetation and no sign of life. Spectroscope indicated only traces of the valuable minerals, and that was Venus. Nothing but nothing, except it scared me. It was like circling a haunted house in the middle of a deep space. I know how unscientific that sounds, but I was scared gutless until we got out of there. I think if our rockets hadn't gone off, I would have cut my throat on the way down. It's not like the moon. The moon is desolate, but somehow antiseptic. That world we saw was utterly unlike anything that anyone had ever seen. Maybe it's a good thing that cloud cover is there. It was like a skull that's been picked clean. That's the closest I can get. On the way back, we heard the Senate had voted to have space exploration funds. Corey said something like, looks like we're back in the weather satellite business, Artie. But I was almost glad. Maybe we don't belong out there. 12 days later, Corey was dead and I was crippled for life. We bought all our trouble on the way down. The chute was fouled. How's that for life's little ironies? We've been in space for over a month, gone further than any humans had ever gone, and it all ended the way it did because some guy was in a hurry for his coffee break and let a few lines get fouled. We came down hard. A guy that was in one of the copters said it looked like a gigantic baby falling out of the sky, with the placenta trailing after it. I lost consciousness when we hit. I came to when they were taking me across the deck of the Portland. They hadn't even had a chance to roll up the red carpet we were supposed to walk on. I was bleeding and being hustled up to the infirmary over a red carpet that didn't look anywhere near as red as I did. I was in Bethesda for 2 years. They gave me the Medal of Honor and a lot of money in this wheelchair. I came down here the next year. I like to watch the rockets take off. I know, Richard said. He paused. Show me your hands. No. It came out very quickly and sharply. I can't let them see. I told you that. It's been 5 years, Richard said. Why now, Arthur? Can you tell me that? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe whatever it is has a long gestation period. Or who's to say I even got it out there? Whatever it was might have been turned me in Fort Lauderdale. Or right here on this porch for all I know. Richard sighed and looked over at the water, now reddish with the late evening sun. I'm trying, Arthur. I don't I don't want to I don't want to think that you are losing your mind. If I have to, I'll show you my hands, I said. It cost me an effort to say it, but only if I have to. Richard stood up and found his cane. He looked old and frail. I'll get the dune buggy. We'll look for the boy. Thank you, Richard. He walked out toward the rutted dirt track that led to his cabin. I could just see the roof of it over the big dune, the one that runs almost the whole length of Key Caroline. Over the water toward the cape, the sky had gone an ugly plum color, and the sound of thunder came faintly to my ears. I didn't know the boy's name, but I saw him every now and again, walking along the beach at sunset, with his sleeve under his arm. He was tanned almost black by the sun, and all he was ever clad in was a frayed pair of denim cutoffs. On the far side of Key Caroline, there is a public beach, and an enterprising young man can make perhaps as much as $5 on a good day patiently sieving the sand for buried quarters or dimes. Every now and then I would wave to him and he would wave back. Both of us non-committal, strangers yet brothers. Year-round dwellers set against a sea of money spending, Cadillac driving, loud-mouthed tourists. I imagine he lived in the small village clustered around the post office, about a half mile further down. When he passed by that evening, I had already been on the porch for an hour, immobile, watching. Watching. I had taken off. I had taken off the bandages earlier. The itching had been intolerable, and it was always better when they could look through their eyes. It was a feeling like no other in the world, as if I were a portal just slightly ajar through which they were peeking at a world which they hated and feared. But the worst part was that I could see, too, in a way. Imagine your mind transported into a body of a housefly looking into your own face with 1,000 eyes. Then perhaps you could begin to see why I kept my hands bandaged even when there was no one around to see them. It began in Miami. I had business there with a man named Cresswell, an investigator from the Navy Department. He checks up on me once a year. For a while, I was as close as anyone ever gets to the classified stuff our space program has. I don't know just what it is he looks for. A shifty gleam in the eye, maybe. Or maybe a scarlet letter on my forehead. God knows why. My pension is large enough to be almost embarrassing. Creswell and I were sitting on the terrace of his hotel room, sipping drinks and discussing the future of the U.S. space program. It was about 3:15. My fingers began to itch. It wasn't a bit gradual. It was switched on like electric current. I mentioned it to Cresswell. So you picked up some poison ivy on that scrofulous little island, he said, grinning. The only foliage on Key Caroline is a little palmetto scrub, I said. Maybe it's the 7-year itch. I looked down at my hands. Perfectly ordinary hands, but itchy. Later in the afternoon, I signed the same old paper. I do solemnly swear that I have never received nor disclosed and divulged information which would and drove myself back to the key. I've got an old Ford, equipped with hand-operated brake and accelerator. I love it. It makes me feel self-sufficient. It's a long drive back down Route 1, and by the time I got off the big road and onto the Key Caroline exit ramp, I was nearly out of my mind. My hands itched maddeningly. If you have ever suffered through the healing of a deep cut or a surgical incision, you may have some idea of the kind of itch I mean. Live thi- Live things seem to be crawling and boring into my flesh. The sun was almost down and I looked at my hands, carefully in the glow of the dashlight. The tips of them were red now, red and tiny, perfect circlets. Just above the pad where the fingerprint is, where you get calluses if you play guitar. There were also red circles of infection on the space between the first and second joint of each thumb and finger, and on the skin between the second joint and the knuckle. I pressed my right fingers into my lips and withdrew them quickly with a sudden loathing. A feeling of dumb horror had risen in my throat, woolen and choking. The flesh where the red spots had appeared was hot, feverish, and the flesh was soft and gelid, like the flesh of an apple gone rotten. I drove the rest of the way trying to persuade myself that I had indeed caught poison ivy somehow. But in the back of my mind there was another ugly thought. I had an aunt, back in my childhood, who lived the last 10 years of her life closed off from the world in an upstairs room. My mother took her meals up, then her name is a forbidden topic. I found out later that she had Hansen's disease, leprosy. When I got home, I called Dr. Flanders on the mainland and got his answering service instead. Dr. Flanders was on a fishing cruise, but if it was urgent, Dr. Ballinger, excuse me, when will Doc, when will Dr. Flanders be back? Tomorrow afternoon at the latest. But that, sure. I hung up slowly, then dialed Richard. I let it ring a dozen times before hanging up. After that, I sat indecisive for a while. The itching had deepened. It seemed to emanate from the flesh itself. I rolled my wheelchair over to the bookcase and pulled down the battered medical encyclopedia that I'd had for years. The book was maddeningly vague. It could have been anything or nothing. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I could hear the old ship's clock ticking on the shelf across the room. There was the high, there was the high, thin drone of a jet on its way to Miami. There was the soft whisper of my own breath. I was still looking at the book. The realization crept on me, then sank home, then sank home with a frightening rush. My eyes were closed, but I was still looking at the book. What I was seeing was scenery was smeary and monstrous, the distorted fourth-dimensional counterpart of a book, yet unmistakable for all that. And I was not the only one watching. I snapped my eyes open, feeling the constriction of my heart. The sensation subsided a little, but not entirely. I was looking at the book, seeing the print and diagrams with my own eyes, perfectly normal everyday experience, and I was also seeing it from a different, lower angle and seeing it with other eyes. Seeing not a book, but an alien thing, something of monstrous shape and ominous intent. I raised my hand slowly to my face, catching an eerie vision of my living room and turned into a horror house. I screamed. There were eyes peering up at me through splits in the flesh of my fingers, and even as I watched the flesh was dilating, retreating, as they pushed their mindless way up to the surface. But that was not what made me scream. I had looked into my own face and seen a monster. The dune buggy nosed over the hill, and Richard brought it to a halt next to the porch. The motor gunned and roared choppily. I rolled my wheelchair down the inclined place to the right of the regular steps, and Richard helped me in. All right, Arthur, he said. It's your party. Where to? I pointed down toward the water, where the big dune finally begins to peter out. Richard nodded. The rear wheels spun in sand, and we were off. I usually found time to rib Richard about his driving, but I didn't bother tonight. There was too much else to think about and to feel. They didn't want the dark, and I could feel them straining to see through the bandages, willing me to take them off. The dune buggy bounced and roared through the sand toward the water, seeming almost to take flight from the tops of the small dunes. To the left, the sun was going down in bloody glory. Straight ahead and across the water, the thunderclouds were beating their way towards us, lightning forked out, lightning forked at the water. Off to your right, I said, by that lean-to. Richard brought the dune buggy to a sand-spraying halt beside the rotted remains of the lean-to, reached into the back, and brought out a spade. I winced when I saw it. Where? Richard asked expressionlessly. Right here. I pointed to the place. He got out and walked slowly through the sand of the spot, hesitated for a second, then plunged the shovel into the sand. It seemed that he'd done for a very long time. The sand he was throwing back over his shoulder looked damp and moist. The thunderheads were darker, higher, and the water looked angry and implacable. implacable under their shadow in the reflected glow of the sunset. I knew long before he stopped digging that he was not going to find the boy. They had moved him. I hadn't bandaged my hands last night, so they could see and act. If they had been able to see me kill the boy, they could have used me to move him even while I slept. There's no boy, Arthur. He threw the dirty towel into the dune buggy and sat tiredly on the seat. The coming storm had cast marching, crescent-shaped shadows along the sand. The rising breeze rattled sand against the buggy's rusted body. My fingers itched. They used me to move him, I said dully. They're getting the upper hand, Richard. They're forcing their doorway open a little at a time. 100 times a day I find myself standing in front of some perfectly familiar object. A spatula, a picture, or even a can of beans, with an idea how I got them there. But holding my hands out, showing it to them, seeing it as they do, as an obscenity, something twisted and grotesque. Arthur, he said. Arthur, don't, don't. In the flailing light, his face wan with compassion. Standing in front of the something you said. Moving the boy's body, you said. But you can't walk, Arthur? You're dead from the waist. Wait, hold on a second. I gotta read that again. I gotta do it better than that. Arthur, he said. Arthur, don't. Don't. In the falling lights, his face was with compassion. Standing in front of something, you said. Moving the boy's body, you said. But you can't walk, Arthur. You're dead from the waist down. I touched the dashboard of the dune buggy. This is dead too. This is dead too. But when you enter it, you can make it go. You can make it kill. It couldn't stop you even if it wanted to. I could hear my voice rising hysterically. I am the doorway. Can't you understand that? They've killed this boy, Richard. They moved the body. I think you better see a medical man, he said quietly. Let's go back. Let's check! Check on the boy then. Find out. You said you didn't even know his name. He must have been from the village. It's a small village. I talked to Maud Harrington on the phone when I got the dune buggy. If anyone in the state has a longer nose, I've not come across her. They asked if she's heard of anyone's boy not coming home last night. She said she hasn't. She hadn't. But he's a local. He has to be. He reached out for the ignition switch, but I stopped him. He turned to look at me, and I began to unwrap my hands. From the gulf, thunder muttered and growled. I didn't go to the doctor, and I didn't call Richard back. I spent 3 weeks with my hands bandaged every time I went out. 3 weeks just blindly, hoping it would go away. It wasn't a rational act, I can admit that. If I had been a whole man who didn't need a wheelchair for length, who had spent a normal life in the normal occupation, I might have gone to Doc Flanders or to Richard. I still might have, if it hadn't been for the memory of my aunt, shunned, virtually a prisoner, being eaten alive by her own failing flesh. So I kept a desperate silence and prayed that I would wake up some morning and find it had been an evil dream. And little by little I felt them. Them. An anonymous intelligence I never really wondered what they looked like or where they had come from. It was more, it was moot. I was their doorway and their window on the world. I got enough feedback from them to feel their revulsion and horror, to know that our world was very different. from theirs. Enough feedback to feel their blind hate, but still they watched. Their flesh was embedded in my own. I began to realize that they were using me, actually manipulating me. When the boy passed, raising one hand in his usual non-committal salute, I had just about decided to get in touch with Cresswell at his Navy Department number. Richard had been right about one thing. I was certain that whatever had gotten hold of me had done it in deep space or in that weird orbit named Venus. The Navy would study me, but they would not freakify me. I wouldn't have to wake up anymore into the twinkling darkness and stifle a scream as I felt them watching, watching. My hands went out toward the boy, and I realized that I had not bandaged them. I could see the eyes in the dying light watching silently. They were large, dilated, golden irised. I had poked one of them against the tip of a pencil once, and had felt excruciating agony slam up my arm. The eyes seemed to glare at me with a chained hatred that was worse than physical pain. I did not poke again. And now they were watching the boy. I felt my mind sideslip. A moment later, my control was gone. His door was open. I lurched across the sand toward him, legs scissoring nervously, so much driven deadwood. And my own eyes seemed to close as I saw only, with those alien eyes, saw a monstrous alabaster escape overtopped with a skylight, light, a great purple way, saw a leaning, eroded shack that might have been the carcass of flesh, some unknown flesh-devouring creature, saw an abominated creature that moved and respired and carried a device of wood and wire under its arm, a device constructed of geometrically impossible right angles. I wonder what he thought, this wretched unnamed boy, with a sieve under his arm and his pockets bulging with an odd conglomerate of sandy tourist coins, what he thought when he saw me lurching at him like a blind conductor, stretching out his hands over a lunatic orchestra, what he thought as the last of the light fell across my hands, red and split shining with their burden of eyes, what he thought when the hands made that sudden flailing gesture in the air just before his head burst. I know what I thought. I thought I had peeked over the rim of the universe and into the fires of hell itself. The wind pulled at the bandages and made them into tiny, whipping streamers as I unwrapped them. The clouds had bloated the red remnants of the sunset, and the dunes were dark and shadow cast. The clouds raced and boiled above us. You may promise me one thing, Richard, I said over the rising wind. You must run if it seems I try, as it seems I might try to hurt you. Do you understand that? Yes. His open-throated shirt whipped and rippled with the wind. His face was set, his own eyes little more than sockets in early dark. The last of the bandages fell away. I looked at Richard and they looked at Richard. I saw a face I had known for 5 years and come to love. They saw a distorted, living monolith. You see them, I said hoarsely. Now you see them. He took an involuntary step backward. His face became strained with a sudden unbelieving terror. Lightning slashed out of the sky. Thunder walked in the clouds and the water had gone black as the river Styx. Arthur, how hideous he was! How could I have lived near him, spoken with him? He was not a creature, but mute pestilence. He was... Run! Run, Richard! And he did run. He ran in huge, bounding leaps. He became a snapwood against the living sky. My hands flew over my head in a screaming, orlesque gesture. The fingers reaching to the only familiar thing in the nightmare world, reaching to the clouds. And the clouds answered. There was a huge blue-white streak of lightning that seemed like the end of the world. It struck Richard. It enveloped him. The last thing I remember is the electric stints of ozone and burned flesh. When I awoke, I was sitting calmly on my porch, looking out toward the big dune. The storm had passed and the air was pleasantly cool. There was a tiny sliver of moon. The sand was virginal. No sign of Richard or of the dune buggy. I looked down at my hands. The eyes were opened but glazed. They had exhausted themselves. They dozed. I knew well enough what had to be done. Before the door could be wedged open any further, it had to be locked. Forever. Already I could notice the first signs of structural change in the hands themselves. The fingers were beginning to shorten and to change. There was a small hearth in the living room, and in season I had been in the habit of lighting a fire against the damp for the cold. I lit one now, moving with haste. I had no idea when they might wake up to what I was doing. When it was burning well, I went out back to the kerosene drum and soaked both hands. They came awake immediately, screaming with agony. I almost didn't make it back to the living room and to the fire, but I did make it. That was all 7 years ago. I'm still here, still watching the rockets take off. There have been more of them lately. This is a space-minded administration. There has even been talk of another series of manned Venus probes. I found out the boy's name, not that it matters. He was from the village just as I thought, but his mother had expected him to stay with a friend on the mainland that night, and the alarm was not raised until the following Monday. Richard, well, everyone thought Richard was an odd duck anyway. They suspect he may have gone back to Maryland or taken up with some other woman. As for me, I'm tolerated, although I have quite a reputation for eccentricity myself. After all, how many ex-astronauts regularly write their elected Washington officials with the idea that space exploration money could be better spent elsewhere? I've been along just fine with these hooks. They're a terrible pain for the first year or so, but the human body can adjust to almost anything. I shave with them and even tie my own shoelaces. And as you can see, my typing is nice and even. I don't even expect to have any trouble putting the shotgun into my mouth or pulling the trigger. It started again 3 weeks ago, you see. There's a perfect circle of 12 golden eyes on my chest. Ooh, that sounds like a bit of a creepypasta ending right there. The only thing is, if you don't think about it too much, if you don't think about it enough, it might confuse you with what it might be saying. Hmm. I'm just looking up something real quick. What time is it anyway? It is 1:30 almost. So I think I'll be able to read my this second story and be done with it before, if if not before 2 o'clock. All right. second and final story for the night, because I did say I was going to do two stories, which were I Am the Doorway, and this next story, titled The Mangler. Let's begin. Officer Hunton got to the laundry just as the ambulance was leaving, slowly, with no siren or flashing lights. Ominous. Inside, the office was stuffed with a million silent people, some of them weeping. The plant itself was empty. The big automatic washers at the far end had not even been shut down. It made Hunton very wary. The crowd should be at the scene of the accident, not in the office. It was the way things worked. The human animal had a built-in urge to view the remains. A very bad one, then. Hunton felt his stomach tighten as it always did when the accident was very bad. 14 years of cleaning human litter from highways and streets and the sidewalks at the bases of very tall buildings had not been able to erase that little hitch in the belly, as if something evil had clawed it there. A man in a white shirt saw Hunton and walked toward him reluctantly. He was a buffalo of a man, with head thrust forward between shoulders, nose and cheeks vein broken either from from high blood pressure or too many conversations with the brown bottle. He was trying to frame words, but after two tries, Hunton cut him off briskly. Are you the owner, Mr. Gartley? No, no, I'm Stanner, the foreman. God, this Hunter got out his notebook. Please show me the scene of the accident, Mr. Stunner, and tell me what happened. Stunner seemed to grow even more white. The blotches on his nose and cheeks stood out like birthmarks. Do I have to? Hunton raised his eyebrows. I'm afraid you do. The call I got said it was serious. Serious. Stanner seemed to be battling with his forge. For a moment his Adam's apple went up and down like a monkey on a stick. Mrs. Frawley is dead. Jesus, I wish Bill Gartley was here. What happened? Stanner said, You better come over here. He led Hudson past a row of hard presses, a shirt folding unit, and then stopped by a laundry marking machine. He passed a shaky hand across his forehead. You'll have to go over by yourself, officer. I can't look at it again. It makes me... I can't. I'm sorry. Hunton walked around the marking machine with a mild feeling of contempt for the man. They run a loose shop, cut corners, run live stream through foam-wielded pipes. They work with dangerous cleaning chemicals without the proper protection, and finally, someone gets hurt or gets dead. Then they can't look. They can't. Hunton saw it. The machine was still running. No one had shut it off. The machine he later came to know intimately, the Hadley Watson Model 6-speed ironer and folder, a long and clumsy name. The people who worked here in the steam and wet, in the, in the wet, had a better name for it, the Mangler. Hunter took a long, frozen look, and then he performed a first in his 14 years as a law enforcement officer. He turned around, put a convulsive hand to his mouth, and threw up. Oh, give me a drink real quick. Give me a second. Alright. You didn't eat much, Jackson said. The women were inside, doing dishes and talking to babies, while John Hunton and Mark Jackson sat in lawn chairs near the aromatic barbecue. Hunton smiled slightly at the understatement. He had eaten nothing. There was a bad one today, he said. The worst. Car crash? No. Industrial. Messy? Hunter did not reply immediately, but his face made an involuntary, writhing grimace. He got a beer out of the cooler between them, opened it, and emptied half of it. I suppose you college profs don't know anything about industrial laundries? Jackson chuckled. This one does. I spent a summer working in one as an undergraduate. Then you know the machine they call the speed ironer? Jackson nodded. Sure. They run damp flatwork through them, mostly sheets and linen. A big, long machine. That's it, Hunton said. A woman named Adele Frawley got caught in it at the Blue Ribbon Laundry across town. It sucked her right in. Jackson looked suddenly ill. But that can't happen, Johnny. There's a safety bar. If one of the women feeding the machine accidentally gets a hand under it, the bar snaps up and stops the machine. At least that's how I remember it. Hunton nodded. It's a state law, but it happened. Hunton closed his eyes in the darkness. He could see the Hadley Watson speed ironer again, as it had been that afternoon. It formed a long rectangular box in shape, 30 feet by 6. At the feeder end, a moving canvas belt moved under the safety bar, up at a slight angle and then down. The belt carried driven the damp-dried, wrinkled sheets in continuous cycle over and under 16 huge revolving cylinders that made up the main body of the machine. Over 8 and under 8, pressed between them like this, like thin ham between layers of superheated bread. Steam heat in the cylinders could get adjusted up to 300 degrees for maximum drying. The pressure on the sheets that rode the moving canvas belt was set at 800 pounds per square foot to get out every wrinkle. And Mrs. Frawley, somehow, had been caught and dragged in. The steel, asbestos-jacketed pressing cylinders had been as red as barn paint, and the rising steam from the machine had carried the sickening stench of hot blood. Bits of her white blouse and blue slacks, even ripped segments of her bra and panties, had been torn free and ejected from the machine's far end 30 feet down. The bigger sections of cloth folded with grotesque and blood-stained neatness by the automatic folder. But not even that was the worst. It tried to fold everything, he said to Jackson, taking tasting bile in his throat. But a person isn't a sheet mark. What I saw, what was left of her, like, like Stanner, the hapless foreman he could not finish. They took her out in a basket, he said softly. Jackson whistled. No, hold on. Who's gonna get in the neck? The laundry or the state inspectors? Don't know yet, Hunton said. The malign image still hung behind his eyes. The image of the Mangler wheezing and thumping and hissing, blood dripping down the green sides of the long cabinet in Reynolds. The burning stink of her. It depends on who okayed that goddamn safety bar and under what circumstances. If it's the management, can they wiggle out of it? Hunton smiled without humor. The woman died, Mark. If Bartley and Stanner were cutting corners on the speed ironer's maintenance, they'll go to jail, no matter who they know on the city council. Do you think they were cutting corners? Hunted thought of the blue ribbon laundry, badly lighted, floors wet and slippery, some of the machines incredibly ancient and creaking. I think that's likely, he said quietly. They got up to go in the house together. Tell me how it comes out, Johnny, Jackson said. I'm interested. Hunton was wrong about the mangler. It was clean as a whistle. 6 state inspectors went over it before the inquest, piece by piece. The net result was absolutely nothing. The inquest verdict was death by misadventure. Hunton, dumbfounded, cornered Roger Martin, one of the inspectors, after the hearing. Martin was a tall drink of water with glasses as thick as the bottoms of shot glasses. He fidgeted with the ballpoint pen under Hunton's questions. Nothing? Absolutely nothing doing with the machine? Nothing, Martin said. Of course, the safety bar was the guts of the matter. It's in perfect working order. You heard that Mrs. Gillian testify. Mrs. Frawley must have pushed her hand too far. No one saw that. They were watching their own work. She started screaming. Her hand was gone already, and the machine was taking her arm. They tried to pull her out instead of shutting it down. Pure panic. Another woman, Mrs. Keene, said she did try to shut it off, but it's a fair assumption that she hit the start button rather than the stop in the confusion. By then, it was too late. Then the safety bar malfunctioned, Hunton said flatly. Unless you put her hand over it rather than under. You can't. There's a stainless steel facing above the safety bar, and the bar itself didn't malfunction. It circuited into the machine itself. If the safety bar goes on the blink, the machine shuts down. Then how did it happen, for Christ's sake? We don't know. My colleagues and I are of the opinion that the only way the speed ironer could have killed Mrs. Frawley was for her to have fallen into it from above, and she had both feet on the floor when it happened. A dozen witnesses can testify to that. You're describing an impossible accident, Hunton said. No, only one we don't understand. He paused, hesitated, and then said, I will tell you one thing, Hunton, since you seem to have taken this case to heart. If you mention it to anyone else, I'll deny I said it. But I didn't like that machine. It seemed almost to be mocking us. I've inspected over a dozen speed ironers in the last 5 years on a regular basis. Some of them are in such bad shape that I wouldn't leave a dog unleashed around them. The state law is lamentably lax, but they were only machines for all that. But this one, it's a spook. Hey, Faye. Hello, V. How you doing tonight? I don't know why, but it is. I think if I found one thing, even a technicality, that was off whack, I would have ordered it shut down. Crazy, huh? I felt the same way, Hunton said. Let me tell you about something that happened 2 years ago in Milton, the inspector said. Oh, I'm doing good about new father figure. Ooh, okay. Alright. Let me tell you something about that happened 2 years ago in Milton, the inspector said. He took off his glasses and began to polish them slowly on his vest. Fella had parked an old icebox out on his backyard. The woman who called us said her dog had been caught in it and suffocated. We got the state policeman in the area to inform him that I had to go to the town dump. Nice enough fella. Sorry about the dog. He loaded it into his pickup truck and took it to the dump the next morning. That afternoon, a woman in the neighborhood reported her son missing. God, Hunton said. The icebox was at the dump and the kid was in it, dead. A smart kid, according to his mother. She said he'd no more play in an empty icebox than he would take a ride with a strange man. Well, he did. We wrote it off. Case closed? I guess, Hunton said. No. The dump caretaker went out the next day to take the door off the thing. City Ordinance number 58 on the maintenance of public dumping places. Martin looked at him expressionlessly. He found 6 dead birds inside. Bulls, sparrows, a robin. And he said the door closed on his arm while he was brushing them out. Gave him a hell of a jump. That mangler at the Blue Ribbon strikes me like that, Hunton. I don't like it. They looked at each other, wordlessly in the empty inquest chamber, some 6 city blocks from where the Hadley Watson Model 6 speed ironer and folder sat in the busy laundry, steaming and fuming over its sheets. Alright, now that the character is no longer messing with his glasses, I'll go ahead and put mine back on. The case was driven out of his mind in the space of a week by the press of more prosaic police work. It was only brought back when he and his wife dropped over to Mark Jackson's house for an evening of bidwhist and beer. Jackson greeted him with, "Have you ever wondered if that laundry machine you told me about is haunted, Johnny?" Hutton blinked, at a loss. "What? Oh, excuse me. The speed ironer at the Blue Ribbon Laundry. I guess you didn't catch the squeal this time." "What squeal?" Hutton asked, interested. Jackson passed him the evening paper and pointed to an item at the bottom of page 2. The story said that a steam line had let go on the large speed ironer at the Blue Ribbon Laundry, burning the 3 of the 6 women working at the feeder end. The accident had occurred at 3:45 p.m. and was attributed to a rise in steam pressure from the laundry's boiler. One of the women, Mrs. Annette Gillian, had been held at City Receiving Hospital with second-degree burns. "Funny coincidence," he said, but the memory of Inspector Martin's words in the empty inquest chamber suddenly recurred. "It's a spook." And the story about the dog and the boy and the birds caught in the discarded refrigerator. He played cards very badly that night. Mrs. Gillian was propped up in bed reading Scream Secrets when Hunton came into the 4-bed hospital room. A large bandage blanketed one arm and the side of her neck. The room's other occupant, a young woman with a pallid face, was sleeping. Mrs. Gillian blinked at the blue uniform and smiled tentatively. "If it was for Mrs. Cherenikov, you'll have to come back You'll have to come back later. They just gave her medication." "No, it's for you, Mrs. Gillian." Her smile faded a little. "I'm here unofficially, which means I'm curious about the accident at the laundry. John Hunton." He held out his hand. It was the right move. Mrs. Gillian's smile became brilliant, and she took his grip awkwardly with her unburned hand. "Anything I can tell you, Mr. Hunton?" "God, I thought my Eddie was in trouble at school again." "What happened?" "We was running sheets and the ironer just blew up. Or it seemed that way. I was thinking about going home and getting off my dogs when there's this great big bang, like a bomb. Steam is everywhere when this hissing noise. Awful." Her smile trembled on the verge of extinction. "It was like the ironer was breathing, like a dragon it was. And Alberta, that's Alberta King, shouted that something was exploding and everyone was running and screaming, and Jenny Jason started yelling she was burnt. I started to run away and I fell down. I didn't know I got it worse until then. God forbid it was no worse than it was. That live steam is 300 degrees. The paper said a steam line let go. What does that mean? The overhead pipe comes down into this kind of flexible line that feeds the machine. George, Mr. Stanner, said there must have been a surge of the boiler or something. The line split wide open. Hunton could think of nothing else to ask. He was making ready to leave when she said reflectively, "We never used to have these things on that machine. Only lately. The steam line breaking. That awful, awful incident with Mrs. Frawley. God rest her. And little things. Like the day Essie got her dress caught in one of the drive chains. That could have been dangerous if she hadn't ripped it right out. Bolts and things fall off. Oh, Dimmant, he's the laundry repairman, has had an awful time with it. Sheets get caught in the folder. George says that's because they're using too much bleach in the washers, but it never used to happen. Now the girls hate to work on it. Essie even says there are still little bits of Adol Frawley caught in it, and it's sacrilege or something. Like it had a curse. It's been that way ever since Sherry cut her hand on one of the clamps. Sherry? Hunton asked. Sherry Owlette. Pretty little thing, just out of high school. Good worker, but clumsy sometimes. You know how young girls are. She cut her hand on something? Nothing strange about that. There clamps to tighten down the feeder belts, see? Sherry was adjusting them so we could do a heavier load, and probably dreaming about some boy. She cut her finger and bled all over everything. Mrs. Jillian looked puzzled. It wasn't until after that the bolts started falling off. Adele was, you know, about a week later, as if the machine had tasted blood and found it liked it. Don't women get funny ideas sometimes, Officer Hinton? Hunton, he said absently, looking over her head and into space. Don't you love it when people, mispronounce your name first and or last? Ironically, he had met Mark Jackson in a washateria in the block that separated their houses, and it was there that the cop and the English professor still had their most interesting conversations. Now they sat side by side in bland plastic chairs, their clothes going round and round behind the glass potholes of the coin-op washers. Jackson's paperback copy of Milton's collected works lay neglected beside him, while he listened to Hunton tell Mrs. Gillian's story. When Hunton had finished, Jackson said, "I asked you once if you thought the Mangler might be haunted. I was only half joking. I'll ask you again now." "No," Hunton said uneasily. "Don't be stupid." Jackson watched the turning clothes reflectively. Haunted is a bad word. Let's say possessed. There are almost as many spells for casting demons in as there are for casting them out. Fraser's Golden Bow is repleted with them. Druidic, Druidic and Aztec lore contain others. Even older ones, back to Egypt. Almost all of them can be reduced to startlingly common denominators. The most common, of course, is the blood of a virgin. He looked at Hunton. Mrs. Julian said the trouble started after this Sherry Owlette accidentally cut herself. Oh, come on, Hunton said. You have to admit she sounds just the type, Jackson said. I'll run right over to her house, Hunton said with a small smile. I can see it. Mrs. Owlette, I'm Officer John Hunton. I'm investigating an ironer with a bad case of demon possession and would like to know if you're a virgin. Do you think I'd get a chance to say goodbye to Sandra and the kids before they carted me off to the, to the booby hatch? I'd be willing to bet you'll end up saying something just like that, Jackson said without smiling. I'm serious, Johnny. That machine scares the hell out of me and I've never seen it. For the sake of conversation, Hudson said, what are some of the other so-called common denominators? Jackson shrugged. Hard to say without study. Most Anglo-Saxon hex formulas specify graveyard dirt or the eye of a toad. European spells often mention the hand of glory, which can be interpreted as the actual hand of a dead man or one of the hallucinogenics used in connection with the witch's Sabbath, usually belladonna uh, or a psilocybin derivative. There could be others. And you think all those things got into the far ribbon, into the blue ribbon and ironer? Christ, Mark, I'll bet there isn't any belladonna within a 500-mile radius. Or do you think someone whacked off their Uncle Fred's hand and dropped it in the folder? If 700 monkeys typed for 700 years, one of those would turn out the works of Shakespeare. Hutton finished sourly. Go to hell. You, your turn to go across to the drugstore and get some dimes for the dryers. Damn. Okay then. Hmm. It was very funny how George Stanner lost his arm in the Mangler. 7 o'clock Monday morning, the laundry was deserted except for Stanner and Herb Divant, the maintenance man. They were performing the twice yearly function of greasing the Mangler's bearings before the laundry's regular day began at 7:30. Diamond was at the far end, greasing the four secondaries, and thinking of how unpleasant this machine made him feel lately, when the Mangler suddenly roared into life. He had been holding up 4 of the canvas exit belts to get at the motor beneath, and suddenly the belts were running in his hands, ripping the flesh off his palms, dragging him along. He pulled free with the convulsive jerk seconds before the belts would have carried his hands into the folder. What the Christ, George? He yelled. Shut the frickin' thing off! George Stanner began to scream. It was a high, wailing, blood-maddening sound that filled the laundry, echoing off the steel faces of the washers, the grinning mouths of the steam presses, the vacant eyes of the industrial dryers. Stanner drew in a great whooping gasp of air and screamed again, "Oh, God of Christ, I'm caught! I'm caught!" The rollers began to produce rising steam. The folder gnashed and thumped. Bearings and motors seemed to cry out with a hidden life of their own. Dimmond raced to the other end of the machine. The first roller was already going a sinister red. Dimmond made a moaning, gobbling noise in his throat. The mangler howled and thumped and hissed. A deaf observer might have thought at first that Stanner was merely bent over the machine at an odd angle. Then even a deaf man would have seen the pallid, eye-bulging rictus of his face, mouth twisted open in a continuous scream. The arm was disappearing under the safety bar, and beneath the first roller, the fabric of his shirt had torn away at the shoulder seam, and his upper arm bulged grotesquely as the blood was pushed steadily backward. Turn it off! Stanner screamed. There was a snap as his elbow broke. Dimon thumbed the off button. The Mangler continued to hum and growl and turn. Unbelieving, he slammed the button again and again. Nothing. The skin of Stanner's arm had grown shiny and taut. Soon it would split with the pressure the roll was putting on it, and still he was conscious and screaming. Dimmons had a nightmare cartoon image of a man flattened by a steamroller, leaving only a shadow. Fuses! Stanner screeched. His head was being pulled down, as he was dragged forward. Dimmond whirled and ran to the boiler room. Stanner's screams chasing him like lunatic ghosts. The mist, stench of blood, and steam rose in the air. On the left wall were 3 heavy gray boxes containing all the fuses for the laundry's electricity. Dimmond yanked them open and began to pull the long cylindrical fuses like a crazy man, throwing them back over his shoulders. The overhead lights went out, then the air compressor, then the boiler itself, and a huge dying whine. And still the Mangler turned. Stanner's screams had been reduced to bubbly moans. Dimmond's eyes happened on the fire axe in its glassed-in box. He grabbed it with a small gagging whimper and ran back. Stanner's arm was gone almost to the shoulder. Within seconds he his bent and straining neck would be snapped against the safety bar. The safety bar. I can't, the man blubbered, holding the axe. Jesus, George. I can't. I can't. I... The machine was an abattoir now. The folders spat out pieces of shirt sleeve, scraps of flesh, a finger. Stanner gave a huge whooping scream, and Dement swung the axe up and brought it down in the laundry's shadowy lightlessness. Twice. Again. Stanner fell away, unconscious and blue, blood jetting from the stump just below the shoulder. The Mangler sucked what was left into itself and shut down. Weeping, Dement pulled his spout out of its loops and began to make a tourniquet. Geez, that was probably the most brutal reading I've ever done. This was very much if this wasn't already known that it was a Stephen King book, I'm pretty sure what I just read would tell you that, because goddamn does this man love to be descriptive at times. Jeezy cow, man. He is a very descriptive writer. Which is ironic because one of the 2 books I have that I got at Walmart today has a review on the bottom of it, has a quote on the bottom of it that's said by Stephen King himself critiquing the book. But we'll get to that book when we get to it. I don't know when I'll be reading it, but we'll get to it when I decide to get to it. Anyway. Excuse me. Hunton was talking on the phone with Roger Martin, the inspector. Jackson watched him while he patiently rolled a ball back and forth for 3-year-old Patty Hunton to chase. He pulled all the fuses? Hunton was asking. And the out button just didn't function, huh? Has the ironer been shut down? Good. Great. Huh? No, not official. Hunton frowned and then looked sideways at Jackson. Hello, GC. How you doing tonight? Hunton frowned and looked sideways at Jackson. Are you still reminded of that refrigerator, Roger? Yes. Me too. Goodbye. He hung up and looked at Jackson. Let's go see the girl, Mark. She had her own apartment. The hesitant yet proprietary ways she showed them in after Hudson had flashed his buzzer made him suspect that she hadn't had it long, and she sat uncomfortably across from them in the carefully decorated postage stamp living room. I'm Officer Hunton, and this is my associate, Mr. Jackson. It's about the accident at the laundry. He felt hugely uncomfortable with this dark, shyly pretty girl. Oh, excuse me. Awful, Sherry Owlett murmured. It's the only place I've ever worked. Mr. Bartley is my uncle. I liked it because it let me have this place and my own friends. But now, it's so spooky. The State Board of Safety has shut the ironer down pending a full investigation, Hunton said. Did you know that? Sure, she sighed restlessly. I don't know what I'm going to do. Miss Owlett, Jackson interrupted. You had an accident with the ironer, didn't you? Cut your hand on a clamp, I believe? Yes, I cut my finger. Suddenly her face clouded. That was the first thing. She looked at them woefully. Sometimes I feel like the girls don't like me so much anymore, as if I were to blame. I have to ask you a hard question, Jackson said slowly. A question you won't like. It seems absurdly personal and off the subject, but I can only tell you it is not. Your answers won't ever be marked down in a file or record. She looked frightened. Did I do something? Jackson smiled and shook his head. She mounted. Thank God for Mark, Hunton thought. I'll add this, though. The answer may help you keep your nice little flat here. Get your job back, and make things at the laundry the way they were before. I'd answer anything to have that, she said. Here we go. Sherry, are you a virgin? No, seriously, he literally asks her right to her face if she is a virgin. She looked utterly flabbergasted, utterly shocked, as if a priest had given communion and then slapped her. Then she lifted her head, made a gesture at her neat efficiency apartment, as if asking them how they could believe it might be a place of as a nation. I'm saving myself and my husband, she said simply. Well, that answers that question. But still, Hunton and Jackson looked calmly at each other. And in that tick of a second, Hunton knew that it was all true. A devil had taken over the inanimate steel and cogs and gears of the Mangler and had turned it into something with its own life. Thank you, Jackson said quietly. You know what? I feel like Stephen King sometimes likes to make inanimate objects come to life. Carrie. No, wait, not Carrie. Christine, what am I talking about? Fourth, you know of Carrie, and you still say Carrie, knowing full well that it's Christine that's the inanimate object because it's a fucking car. How fucking stupid are you? You aren't even a fan of Stephen King's work, and you still get the wrong title? Wow, not a real Stephen King fan. I'll be quiet. Yes, I am a Stephen King fan. Sometimes I may have made them. I mean, to be fair, the guy's made God knows how many books. He has written so many damn books that it's not even funny. Shit. I mean, hell, dude, I got of all of Stephen King's books that I currently have, I could probably name off most, if not all of them. I have Carrie, Misery, not The Shining, The Green Mile, It, um, well, the book I'm reading right here, Night Shift, which was the latest one I got from Stephen King's work, um, The Outsider, Lizzie's Story, 1922, The Long Walk, and I think that's oh, and Cell. I also have the book Cell by Stephen King as well. I but I do think that is all of the books of his that I have. That is at the top of my head, because I'm pretty sure I probably am missing a few of them. Oh, and yeah, and I am actually missing one. Pet Cemetery. Yes. Yes, Pet Cemetery. I have seen the old movie. I haven't seen the remake. But I do know the old movie, and I have seen bits and pieces of it, but not the movie as a whole. But I do have the book Pet Cemetery. Anyway, what now? Hunton asked bleakly as they rode back. Find a priest to exorcise it? Jackson snorted. You'd go a far piece to find out that wouldn't hand you a few tracts to read while he phoned the booby hatch. It has to be our play, Johnny. Can, oh, can we do it? Maybe. The problem is this. We know something is in the mangler. We don't know what. Hunton felt cold as if touched by a fleshless finger. There are a great many demons. Is the one we're dealing with in the circle of the Bubastis or Pan, Baal, or the Christian deity we call Satan? We don't know. If the demon had been deliberately cast, we would have a better chance. But this seems to be a case of random possession. Jackson ran his fingers through his hair. The blood of a virgin, yes. But that narrows it down hardly at all. We have to be sure, very sure. Why? Hunton asked bluntly. Why not just get a bunch of exorcism formulas together and try them out? Jackson's face went cold. This isn't cops and robbers, Johnny. For Christ's sake, don't think it is. The rate of exorcism is horribly dangerous. It's like controlled nuclear fission, in a way. We could make a mistake and destroy ourselves. The demon is caught in that piece of machinery, but give it a chance and it could get out. It would love to get out, Jackson said grimly. And it likes to kill. When Jackson came over the following evening, Hunton had sent his wife and daughter, to a movie. They had the living room to themselves, and for this, Hunton was relieved. He could still barely believe what he had become involved in. I canceled my classes, Jackson said, and spent the day with some of the most god-awful books you can imagine. This afternoon I fed over 30 recipes for calling demons into the tech computer. I've got a number of common elements, surprisingly few. He showed Hunton the list. Blood of a virgin, graveyard dirt, hand of glory, bat's blood, night moss, horse's hoof, eye of toad. There were others, all marked secondary. Horse's hoof, Hunton said thoughtfully. Funny, very common. In fact, could these things, any of them, be interpreted loosely? Hunton interrupted. If lichens picked at night could be substituted for night moss, for instance? Yes. It's very likely, Jackson said. Magical formulas are often ambiguous and elastic. The black arts have always allowed plenty of room for creativity. Substitute jello for horse's hoof, Hunton said. Very popular in bagged lunches. I noticed a little container of it sitting under the ironer's sheet platform on the day the Frawley woman died. Gelatin is made from horse's hooves. Jackson nodded. Anything else? Bat's blood. Well, it's a big place. Lots of unlighted nooks and crannies. Bats seem likely, although I doubt if the management would admit to it. One could conceivably have been trapped in the mangler. Jackson tipped his head back and knuckled bloodshot eyes. It fits. It all fits. Before we continue, I do want to say, earlier tonight, I'm going to kick my mother's bum for this one, okay? But earlier tonight, just reading about the part involving Bat's blood, my mama decided I just got home from work when this happened. I was just minding my own business back here watching the YouTube when all of a sudden my mama came back here and said, quote, she just freaking out a little bit. Boys, we got a bat! And I went, and I thought she was sick. And I thought, she said, we got something bad. And I said, how bad? And she said, no, a bat. And I was like, a bat? Yeah. So then I put my plate down and she has this fucking little bat thing, just standing, it's like just laying down on the floor. So I'm getting close to it and eventually I just touch it and it doesn't move. So so she's like, is it dead? And I was like, I think it's dead. So then I picked it up, and then she takes a paper towel, some paper towels, and puts it on there and throws it away. And that's when I find out that it was that my my dad initially found this bat, and apparently they want to try to get me with it or some shit. I don't know. But I'm like, really, Mama? The next time you guys see something out of the ordinary and it's dead, take care of it yourselves and don't tell me about it. And then I just walked back in here and just watched some more. I was like, yeah, that is a true story, by the way. That really did happen a few hours ago. Yeah, it was very fucking stupid in my book, but I digress. Anyway. It does? Yes. We can safely rule out the hand of glory, I think. Certainly no one dropped a hand into the ironer before Mrs. Frawley's death, and Belladonna is definitely not indigenous to the area. Graveyard dirt? What do you think? It would have to be a hell of a coincidence, Hunton said. Nearest cemetery is Pleasant Hill, and that's 5 miles from the Blue Ribbon. Okay, Jackson said. I got the computer operator, who thought I was getting ready for Halloween, to run a positive breakdown of all the primary and secondary elements on the list. Every possible combination. I threw out some 2 dozen which were completely meaningless. The others fall into fairly clear-cut categories. The elements we've isolated are in one of those. What is it? Jackson grinned. An easy one. The mythos centers in South America with branches in the Caribbean, related to voodoo. The literature I've got looks on the looks on the deities as strictly as bushmeat compared to some of the real heavies, like Sadath or He Who Cannot Be Named. The thing in that machine is going to slink away like a neighborhood bully. How do we do it? Holy water and a smidgen of the holy Eucharist ought to do it. And we can read some of the Leviticus to it. Strictly Christian white magic. You sure it's not worse? Don't see how it can be, Jackson said pensively. I don't mind telling you I was worried about that hand of glory. That's very black juju. Strong magic. Holy water wouldn't stop it? A demon caught up in conjunction with the hand of glory could eat a stack of Bibles for breakfast. We would be in bad trouble in messing with something like that at all. Better to put the goddamn thing apart. Better to pull the goddamn thing apart. Well, are you completely sure? No, but fairly sure. It all fits too well. When? The sooner the better, Jackson said. How do we get in? Break a window? Hunton smiled, reached into his pocket, and David a key in front of Jackson's nose. Where'd you get that? Hartley? No, Hunton said. From a state inspector named Martin. You know what we're doing? I think he suspects. He told me a funny story a couple of weeks ago. About the mangler? No, Hunton said. About a refrigerator. Come on. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Jackson's on the line. Wait, what do you mean a refrigerator? What the hell happened? Adele Frawley was dead, sewed together by a patient undertaker. She lay in her coffin. Yet something of her spirit perhaps remained in the machine, and if it did, it cried out. She would have known, could have warned them. She had been prone to indigestion, and for this common ailment, she had taken a common stomach tablet called Easy Gel, purchasable over the counter of any drugstore for 79 cents. The side panel holds a printed warning. People with glaucoma must not take Easy Gel because the active ingredient causes an aggravation of that condition. Unfortunately, Adele Raleigh did not have that condition. She might have remembered the day, shortly before Sherry Outlet cut her hand, that she had dropped a full box of Easy Gel tablets into the mangler by accident. But she was dead, unaware that the active ingredient which soothed her heartburn was a chemical derivative of a belladonna, known quaintly as some European countries as the hand of glory. There was a sudden ghastly burping noise in the spectral silence of the blue ribbon laundry. A bat fluttered manfully for its hole in the insulation above the dryers where it had roosted, wrapping wings around its blind face. It was a noise almost like a chuckle. The mangler began to run with a sudden lurching grind, belts hurrying through the darkness, cogs meeting and meshing and grinding, heavy pulverizing rollers rotating on and on. It was ready for them. It sounds like it's going to be like the final showdown, you know? So let's see what happens. When Hunton pulled into the parking lot, it was shortly after midnight and the moon was hidden behind a raft of moving clouds. He jammed on the brakes and switched off the lights in the same motion. Jackson's forehead almost slammed against the padded dash. He switched off the ignition and the steady thump his thump became louder. It's the Mangler, he said slowly. It's the Mangler. Running by itself in the middle of the night. They sat for a moment in silence, feeling the fear crawl up their legs. Hunton said, "All right, let's do it." They got out and walked to the building, the sound of the mangler growing louder. As Hunton put the key into the lock of the service door, he thought that the machine did sound alive, as if it were breathing in great hot gasps and speaking to itself in hissing, sardonic whispers. All of a sudden, I'm glad I'm with a cop, Jackson said. He shifted the brown bag that he held from one arm to the other. Inside was a small jelly jar filled with holy water, wrapped in waxed paper, and a Gideon Bible. They stepped inside and Hunton snapped up the light switches by the door. The fluorescence flickered into cold life. At the same instant, the mangler shut off. A membrane of steam hung over its rollers. It waited for them in its new ominous silence. God, it's an ugly thing, Jackson whispered. Come on, Hunton said, before we lose our nerve. He walked over to it. The safety bar was in its down position over the belt which fed the machine. Hunton put out a hand. Close enough, Mark. Give me the stuff and tell me what to do. But no argument. Jackson handed him the bag and Hunton put it on the sheeted table in front of the machine. He gave Jackson the Bible. I'm going to read, Jackson said. When I point at you, sprinkle the holy water on the machine with your fingers. You say, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, get thee from this place, now unclean. Got it? Yes. The second time I point, break the wafer and repeat the incantation again. How will we know if it's working? You'll know. The thing is apt to break every window in the place getting out. If it doesn't work the first time, we keep doing it until it does. I'm scared green, Hunton said. As a matter of fact, so am I. If you're wrong about the hand of glory, we're not, Jackson said. Here we go. He began. His voice filled the empty laundry with spectral cult echoes. Turnest not thou aside to idols, nor make molten gods for yourself. I am the Lord thy God. The words fell like stones into a silence that had suddenly become filled with a creeping, tomb-like cold. The mangler remained still and silent under the fluorescence, and to Hunton it still seemed a grin. And the land will vomit you out for having defiled it, as it vomited out nations before you. Jackson looked up, his face stained and pointed. Hunton sprinkled holy water across the feeder belt. There was a sudden gnashing scream of tortured metal. Smoke rose from the canvas belts where the holy water had touched and took on writhing red-tinged shapes. The mangler suddenly jerked into life. We've got it! Johnson cried above the rising clamor. It's on the run! He began to read again, his voice rising over the sound of the machinery. He pointed to Hunton again, and Hunton sprinkled some of the host. As he did so, he was suddenly swept with a bone-freezing terror, a sudden vivid feeling that it had gone wrong, that the machine had called their bluff, and was the stronger. Jackson's voice was still rising, approaching climax. Sparks began to jump across the arc between the main motor and the secondary. The smell of ozone filled the air, like the copper smell of hot blood. Now the main motor was smoking. The mangler was running at an insane, blurred speed. A finger touched to the central belt would have caused the whole body to be hauled in and turned into a bloody rag in the space of 5 seconds. The concrete beneath their feet trembled and thrummed. A main bearing blew with a searing flash of purple light, filling the chill air with the smell of thunderstorms. And still the mangler ran, faster and faster. belts and rulers and cogs moving at a speed that made them seem to blend and merge, change, melt, trans- transmute. Hunton, who had been standing alone, almost hypnotized, suddenly took a step backward. Get away! He screamed over the blaring racket. We've almost got it, Jackson yelled back. Why? There was a sudden indescribable ripping noise and a fissure in the concrete floor suddenly raced toward them and passed, widening. Chips of the ancient cement flew up in a starburst. Jackson looked at the mangler and screamed. It was trying to pull itself out of the concrete, like a dinosaur trying to escape a tar pit. And it wasn't precisely an ironer anymore. It was still changing, melting. The 550-volt cable fell, spitting blue fire into the rollers. It was chewed away. For a moment, two fireballs glared at them like lambent eyes filled with a great and cold hunger. Another fault line tore open. The mangler leaned toward them with a with an ace of being free of the concrete moorings that held it. It leered at them. The safety bar had slammed up, and what Hunton saw was a gaping, hungry mouth filled with steam. They turned to run, and another fissure opened at their feet. Behind them, a great screaming roar as the thing came free. Hunton leaped over, but Jackson stumbled and fell sprawling. Hunton turned to help, and a huge amorphous shadow fell over him, blocking the fluorescence. It stood over Jackson, who lay on his back, staring up in a silent rictus of terror. The perfect sacrifice. Hunton had only a confused impression of something black and moving that bulked to a tremendous height above them both. Something with glaring electric eyes the size of footballs, an open mouth with a moving canvas tongue. He ran. Jackson's dying scream followed him. When Roger Martin finally got out of bed to answer the doorbell, he was still only a third awake. But when Hunton reeled in, shock slapped him fully into the world with a rough hand. Hunton's eyes bulged madly from his head, and his hands were claws as he scratched at the front of Martin's robe. There was a small oozing cut on his cheek, and his face was splashed with dirty gray specks of powdered cement. His hair had gone dead white. Help me. For Jesus' sake, help me. Mark is dead. Jackson is dead. Slow down, Martin said. Come in the living room. Hunton followed him, making a thick whining noise in his throat like a dog. Martin poured him a 2-ounce knock of Jim Beam, and Hunton held the glass in both hands, downing the raw liquor in a choked gulp. The glass fell unheeded to the carpet, and his hands, like wandering ghosts, sought Martin's lapels again. The mangler killed Mark Jackson. It, oh God, it might get out. We can't let it get out. We can't, we, oh, he began to scream. A crazy whooping sound that rose and fell in jagged circles. Martin tried to hand him another drink, but Hunton knocked it aside. We have to burn it, he said. Burn it before it can get out. Oh, what if it gets out? Oh, Jesus. What if... His eyes suddenly flickered, glazed, rolled up to show the whites, and he fell to the carpet in a stone-like faint. Mrs. Martin was in the doorway, clutching her robe to her throat. Who is he, Raj? Is he crazy? I thought... She shuddered. I don't think he's crazy. She was suddenly frightened by the sick shadow of fear on her husband's face. God, I hope he came quick enough. He turned to the telephone, picked up the receiver, froze. There was a faint, swelling noise from the east of the house, the way that Hunton had come. A steady, grinding clatter growing louder. The living room window stood half open, and now Martin caught a dark smell of the breeze, an odor of ozone or blood. He stood with his hand on the useless telephone as it grew louder, louder, gnashing and fuming, something in the streets that was hot and steaming. The blood stench filled the room. His hand dropped from the telephone. It was already out. That, I would honestly say, if that was not written by Stephen King, that story could easily pass for one of the greatest creepypastas ever written. Like, if it was a creepypasta and not a short story by Stephen King, that story could easily be a very damn good creepypasta. But man, it's that ending though. That's the ending that basically tells you, yep, whoever it goes after, well, they are easily 100% dead. That's one of those stories that's gonna have an end, that's gonna have a very horrifying ending to it. But yeah, there's a reason why I say it makes a damn good creepypasta story. Because some of the number of creepypastas that have come out, excuse me, sometimes they don't always have a good ending. As a matter of fact, they say things in a way where you think it's gonna have a happy ending or at least a good ending. But then when you read the very last bit of it, you realize, yeah, I don't think so now. I thought it was gonna happen, but no, it didn't. Like, take a book, one of the first books that I've read when I started doing the reading live streams. Take the book Pen Pal, well, the book slash creepypasta Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach, who has since written another book, uh, uh, when that book was published. Take that for example. You think, because that whole story is a very one of the most terrifying stories I've ever read because of how realistic it sounds. And I always love reading realistic horror movies. Well, I like reading realistic horror books and watching realistic horror movies. But obviously, I have seen really good non-realistic looking horror movies. Um, but yeah, that one was a realistic look to me because because the whole time it seems like every story has a neutral beginning. The middle is where, okay, some things are happening, but also at the same time, you feel like, okay, there's probably going to be a happy ending here. But no, it never ends happily for the character involved. And if you have not read Pen Pal, I will not spoil anything about it, but I highly recommend it because it is easily one of my favorite stories, whether it be creepypasta or in books, that I've ever read. It's easily, I recommend, especially if you are a fan of Stephen King work, he would be the next best thing I would go for if you've read every Stephen King book and you want somebody else to read, he would be recommended. And I honestly would love to see what other books he writes alongside Pen Pal and, to my knowledge, his most recent book. Bad Man, which ironically has a cover where it's a shopping cart in a parking lot. So that'll be interesting to read. But in any case, that is going to do it for me for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. The next time I read Night Shift, I will be reading another 2 short stories, The Puppy Man and Gray Matter. But for now, that will be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this reading stream. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole